Hello, this is going to be my review of the GIISKOM Fancy Art 2 action camera that you see here. I have a lot to say about this camera, so let's get started with the video. What do I think of this camera? Do I like the video quality? Any other features that I think are interesting? Well, this is a very interesting camera, and I am a little bit disappointed. Overall, very satisfied, but just a little bit disappointed, and I'm going to explain why. So this is a camera which has several accessories. Obviously, there can be a little accessory here towards the bottom, but I didn't attach it here. It's in the underwater housing. The camera is, and I'm just going to take it out for the purposes of showing you the menu, video settings, etc. Underwater housing is included, which is very important. Would not recommend submerging this camera without the underwater housing. Haven't tested underwater, but ideally the underwater housing is supposed to result in the camera being waterproof, but not necessarily 100% guarantee. And if I test it next year, later this year in the summer, I'll let you know how it is underwater. Provide some video samples. But so far, these are video samples not recorded underwater. I'm going to provide you with some videos and photos, so if you would like to see just the video test recorded with this camera, sample photos, and you don't want to listen to my review, please feel free to skip to the next part of this video or click away from the video if you're not interested in either of those things. So here are my thoughts, and the next part of this video are sample videos and photos. Videos recorded mostly with, or rather only with 1080p 60 frames per second, which is my personal favorite resolution. So, the GIISKOM Fancy Art 2 action camera is a camera that records all the way up to 4K resolution at 60 frames per second. However, those are not the resolution. That's not the resolution I'm going to be showing you. I'll be showing you my favorite 1080p 60 frames per second. And in my opinion, for really recreational kind of videos, not the most professional videos, it's a very good setting and doesn't take up too much space on my hard drive. And you can just decide for yourself if you think the video quality looks good. So what are some things that are advertised about this camera? Why did I purchase this camera? And I'm going to explain why in just a second. So this is the highest resolution that we have. We also have photos and a dual touchscreen on the front as well. And here, what's very cool about the packaging is not only does it list the accessories, but it also really talks about what are some of the highlights here. One of the highlights being image stabilization, which is one of the reasons I bought this camera. It was for around $99, and the coupons were varying from $35, $25. There was a $45 off coupon off the $99 price, so I ended up getting the camera for between let's say maybe like $55, something like that, and tax, shipping, etc. So not too expensive. I really did buy this camera mostly because there was that coupon available. I was probably going to buy it eventually, but the coupons vary on Amazon. Sometimes you can get a little bit off of that main price if there's a coupon that you can apply. So with the $45 off coupon off $99, I said, okay, $55, something like that. Very excited to try out this camera. So after talking a lot about really not that much, I just wanted to say I'm going to go through a bunch of things about this camera, then show you the video samples, and of course then at that point you can decide if you think that this is something that you're interested in purchasing, keep browsing, etc. Okay. So I'm just going to start with some things not related to video. The photos on this camera are quite good. There is some distortion with the wide-angle lens, but the photos are quite good. And one other thing that's interesting is that you have the ability to turn on flash for photos. You don't have the option to keep the flash on for videos, but for photos, you do have flash, which is something I've actually never seen on the other 18 action cameras that I have. You do have flash as an option. I took a couple of photos in the dark, and yeah, the flash actually does work, well, for me at least. Quite interesting to have flash. You also have so the photos are decent, especially when there's a lot of lighting. Same with videos. With cheaper action cameras, low lighting, maybe they won't do as well, but in good lighting when it's sunny, the photos actually came out very well, and I'll be showing you some sample photos. There's a space for the tripod here. Very easy to take out the battery cover. It's not detachable. It's part of the camera. It's not like a detachable cover that takes like the difficult to open. This is very easy to use. Just slide to the left, and it just opens. You can put in your memory card. You can take out the battery very easily. It's super easy to use. I like that it's very easy to take out the battery. And why that's important is that you actually have, not only is it easy to take out the battery, and not only do you have two batteries included, one that's in the camera and one that is here. Yeah, I forgot to mention, it's very cool. It's like this very cool box with these little magnets. Very easy to just take this out, show you your accessories here. Not only do you have two batteries, you have this really cool charging station. Let me this really cool charging station where you can charge 2 batteries at the same time. You just connect it, the USB cable to your USB port, laptop, desktop, tower, whatever. And then you will have these indicators that'll change colors as your batteries are being charged. So you can charge 2 batteries at the same time. Super cool, and they charge very quickly, and the battery life on this camera, in my opinion, is just phenomenal. Don't have to worry about that, especially if, oh, well, you run out of battery. Very easy to take out the battery, then charge 2 batteries at the same time by inserting them here, and then charging via the USB with the USB cable to the USB port. Really cool that you can charge both batteries at the same time, that you have 2 batteries in the first place, and that the battery life is also just very good. So that was something I was very happy to see. Definitely something I will take on vacation, not just because of the batteries, but let me get into this. Something else right now. The video quality is very good, especially if you use the right video settings. Let me just show you really quickly. Was very happy with the 1080p 60 frames per second, which is like my go-to video setting. So you can click on the resolution right here. This is a touchscreen. There are some buttons up here, but mostly we'll be relying on the touchscreen to change our settings. So we have 1080p. Click here, and well, actually, yeah, you can kind of scroll to the left and to the right. You can see it goes all the way up to 4K. I have 1080p here. Clicking on the frames per second allows you to change it. So I have it set to 60 frames per second. You can go back. So that's how we end up at 1080p 60 frames per second. Just click here to get to the resolution. And at the bottom again, you can scroll all the way to 4K if you'd like. Swiping down shows that you can turn on the timestamp if you want. So click that, turn on the timestamp, click it again to turn off the timestamp, which would show up in the corner of your video. The sound, the beeping noise when you're with the menus, the lock, Wi-Fi, I haven't used that. Preferences will get you to some additional video settings like image stabilization. I'm going to talk about that in just a moment, so easy to turn it off, turn it on. You can scroll down for some additional settings. Field of view, frame of view. I chose narrow. I like that so I can minimize distortion, minimize the fisheye effect. I don't know if it's field of view or frame of view or something like that. I choose narrow because I don't really like the wide angle. Flash lamp, again, that I think is for the photos, the flash for the photo feature, which is quite cool. Microphone, I guess recording with or without the audio, formatting the memory card. Screensaver, I guess power off. Like screensaver, if power off if your device is inactive, or if you're not touching it, is it the screen going to time out to save some battery? You can also scroll to the left or to the right to get you to the photo mode, and then of course to change photo resolution, you just click on the megapixel number. It goes all the way up to 24 megapixels. There's also digital zoom available for photos. So now we're at videos because we swipe left or swipe right to get back to the video setting. So swiping up gets you to playback mode, where it's going to tell you if there's any videos available which you've recorded. Again, swipe up. There's photos and videos, so we click on that. We can see, well, we currently have no files that we've recorded. Again, swiping down gets you to your preferences where you can edit those settings, and the other settings are of course located on the screen itself. Click here on the video little icon and you can see that you have a time-lapse feature, slow motion, etc. And then of course for photos, if you swipe left or right, there's different settings for photos. How do we go back? Okay, so to activate the second screen, you're just going to click the down button. There it is. There's the second screen. You can see, and then click the down button again, and that'll put back the main screen. So there's a couple things I just really wanted to talk about, actually, which things that kind of left me a little bit disappointed. And the first thing that left me a little bit disappointed is, let me just say that despite this is a camera I would definitely take on vacation because I do really like the 1080p 60 frames per second. The 4K setting is also pretty good. Same with the 2.7K. The video quality itself I think is very good, which is why I would definitely take this camera on vacation. There were just 2 things that left me just a little bit disappointed, but overall I do really like this camera, especially with the charging station, the 2 batteries, the flash for the photos, good battery life, very clear video quality, especially when it's sunny and where there's lots of light. The image stabilization, which was really going to be one of the things that I was looking for when I bought this camera, image stabilization I was disappointed with. I detected not only a lot of shakiness, but sometimes it was just downright glitchy with the image stabilization. The idea is that, of course, to minimize a sort of shakiness when you're walking around. Oops, sorry about that. Minimize shakiness when you're walking around with the camera. But not only did I detect some shakiness with the camera when I was recording with image stabilization, but one time there was even a glitch where the video just quickly moved up and down, split second. It's just very distracting. I found that instead of it did stabilize the footage, but it was also kind of sliding around. It was this kind of unsettling sliding around of the picture. You're gonna see some samples, a couple of samples with image stabilization, just sliding around, and it distracted me, and I was actually realized this is not my favorite image stabilization. It's possible to have good image stabilization like on the Campark X35. This is not one of those cameras, which is fine. I mean, I'll still take this on vacation, but I will not be using the image stabilization feature because there was shakiness, there was sliding around, and it was a little bit unsettling. So I realized, well, you know what, it does stabilize the footage, but mostly if you're just not walking around with the camera, but that kind of defeats the purpose. So I didn't really like the image stabilization, but feel free to decide differently if once you watch the samples. The other thing, which is very curious, is that I actually didn't know how to transfer files. I mean, typically with the USB cable like this, which is an accessory included with the camera, all you have to do is plug it in and then wait for the option on the screen to be able to transfer the files, and then you click on it, or it'll automatically open up the folder on your computer where you can transfer the files to your computer hard drive, or you might have to turn the camera on and off until it gets you to that setting where it says, okay, would you like to transfer files? Would you like to charge the camera? Would you like to use it as a webcam, etc.? And I never got that. I mean, with this, never got that option here. I don't know if I was doing something wrong, but I really did try to do research. I looked at the manual. I kind of played around with it. I turned the camera on and off while it was plugged in with the USB cable. I could never find that option to transfer files, which is very strange because it's on all the other 19 or 18 cameras I have. It's supposed to be very easy. So, or at least possible, just after messing around with it for a few minutes. So what I ended up doing was taking out the memory card, putting in another camera, which would then recognize those files, transferring it to my computer, and that's how I would do it. I would literally have to take this out, put it into a different device that would recognize the memory card transfer files, because for some reason when I plugged this in connected it to my laptop, I didn't see an option to transfer the files. So I don't know if I have to use an app, use my smartphone, whatever, but it shouldn't be that complicated, and I just wasn't able to figure it out. If you can figure it out, great. But that was something that I thought was just very strange, that after having used 18 or 19, I have a lot of these action cameras. This just happens to be the one where I have no idea how to transfer the files. And I've been doing this for a couple of years, 2.5 years, so I thought that was odd, but it didn't really take away anything from this camera because I have lots of cables, I have lots of cameras, lots of memory cards, so I was able to say, okay, well, I put this card on a different device, which recognizes the files, and I transfer it over, then I put the memory card back into this camera, and I start again. An extra step, but just keep in mind that if that happens to you, and if you don't have another device, no other way to read the memory card except on this device, you might have to figure out another way to do it. But it was too bad because I was really just had the advantage of I had other cameras. I could put the memory card in and then use that to transfer the files. So a little bit strange, but an extra step for me at least, having to transfer the files by putting the card in a different camera. But despite that, and despite the image stabilization, in my opinion, just being poor quality, in my opinion, this is really a camera with fantastic battery life, very good photos for a cheap action camera, very good quality, 1080p 60 frames per second. The 4K setting isn't bad either. In good lighting, and as with most cheap action cameras, in good lighting when it's sunny, this camera really does have excellent video quality. And one thing I forgot to mention was that I have never seen a better microphone on any cheap action camera, the 19 that I have, except this one. The microphone, I don't know where it is here, but this microphone is just, oh, maybe it's here, the microphone. The way it picks up audio, this camera, this microphone is phenomenal. The microphone records such good audio, it might even rival this camera. Maybe not exactly, but usually on cheap action cameras, the audio is just, I get used to the audio just being muffled, being just not very good. It's just kind of too fuzzy, just especially if I'm speaking very loud next to the camera. It's just, I know the audio is not going to be great. This one, hands down, phenomenal microphone, which is also why I would take it on vacation. Maybe I wouldn't use it for walking around because the image stabilization, in my opinion, isn't very good. But I'm standing still. If I'm doing commentary, this is the camera I would have, and I wouldn't take any other camera for audio quality. This microphone picks up audio just in a fantastic way. I don't know how they do it, but extremely impressed with the microphone on this little camera. Just, I'm going to say it again, phenomenal microphone. Really amazing. The only thing lacking here was the image stabilization and the fact that I couldn't figure out how to transfer files with this camera using a USB cable. But again, I was able to get around that by taking out the memory card, putting in a different camera. Despite those things, really good video quality, unbelievably good audio quality. So I really do like this camera overall. I will say though that I paid between $55 and $60 for this. If I'd paid $80, $90, $100, might have been a little bit more disappointed. Remember, value for money comes into play here. But given that I did pay around $60, not too much money, I'm very happy with this product. Sometimes it just really depends on how much money you pay for it. But even if I'd paid $80, I would still be happy, because despite the image stabilization not being the best, I just have to say the video quality itself. I use the narrow field of view. I didn't use the wide angle lens. I used the narrow. The video quality, the audio quality is very good. So overall, I am very happy with this product. The GIISKOM Fancy R2 action camera definitely would earn a recommendation from me. Very happy with this product. We'll definitely be taking it on vacation, and we'll also test it underwater at some point. Thanks for watching this review. Video samples will follow, and photo samples will follow as well. The GIISKOM Fancy R2 action camera. This is my review.
Hello, this is a 1080p video test, 60 frames per second with the GIISKOM Fancy R2 action camera. 1080p video test, 60 frames per second with the GIISKOM Fancy R2 action camera that you see here. 1080p, 60 frames per second video test. .1080p video test, 60 frames per second. .1080p video test, 60 frames per second with the GIISKOM Fancy R2 action camera. This is what we're recording with right now. Got this mirror. 1080p video test, 60 frames per second. .1080p video test at 60 frames per second with the GIISKOM Fancy R2 action camera that you see here. This is what we're recording with right now. 1080p video test at 60 frames per second. With the narrow viewing angle, there's a wide, I think medium and wide, medium, and narrow. We have the narrow viewing angle to minimize the fisheye effect and to minimize distortion, any distortion. 1080p video test, 60 frames per second. .1080p video test at 60 frames per second on this Sunday afternoon. .1080p video test at 60 frames per second with the GIISKOM Fancy R2 action camera. Hello, this is a 1080p 60 frames per second video test with the GIISKOM Fancy R2 action camera. 1080p 60 frames per second video test. (1080p 60 frames per second video test with the GIISKOM Fancy R2 action camera. (1080p 60 frames per second video test with the GIISKOM Fancy R2 action camera. How well can you hear me right now? How good do you think the video quality is? This Sunday late afternoon. This is again 1080p 60 frames per second with the GIISKOM Fancy R2 action camera. (1080p video test 60 frames per second with the GIISKOM Fancy R2 action camera. (1080p video test 60 frames per second. With the GIISKOM Fancy R2 action camera. (1080p 60 frames per second video test with the GIISKOM Fancy R2 action camera. 1080p 60 frames per second. (1080p video test 60 frames per second with the GIISKOM Fancy R2 action camera. (1080p video test 60 frames per second with the GIISKOM Fancy R2 action camera. (1080p video test 60 frames per second with the GIISKOM Fancy R2 action camera. (1080p video test 60 frames per second with the GIISKOM Fancy R2 action camera. (1080p video test 60 frames per second with the GIISKOM Fancy R2 action camera. 1080p video test, 60 frames per second with the GIISKOM Fancy R2 action camera. .1080p video test, 60 frames per second with the GIISKOM Fancy R2 action camera, recently purchased on Amazon. 1080p video test, 60 frames per second. .1080p video test, 60 frames per second. .1080p video test, 60 frames per second. .1080p video test, 60 frames per second. With the GIISKOM Fancy R2 action camera. 1080p video test, 60 frames per second. Action camera, recently purchased on Amazon. Touchscreen with various video resolution settings, all the way up to 4K 60 frames per second. This is my personal favorite, 1080p 60 frames per second. A good combination of smooth video and good quality. I do like the quality on this camera. I don't like the image stabilization. This video clip does not have image stabilization, however it is a feature. This is just a 1080p video test at 60 frames per second. The photo feature is quite good in my opinion, however there is a lot of distortion, otherwise known as the fisheye effect, so it's not necessarily representative of reality, but the picture quality itself is decent. However, I'm very happy with, really just talking about the video quality, I'm happy with 1080p 60 frames per second, but for a more expensive device, which this was on the little more expensive side of the cheap action camera world, I would have hoped for a little bit better image stabilization, because the one that they have here can be quite glitchy, unfortunately. Would I take this camera on vacation? Absolutely, because it has underwater housing. I have yet to test it underwater. However, there is underwater housing, so next time I go on vacation, I'll definitely take this camera and we'll show you the results, some underwater tests with this camera. But for now, we're not testing the camera underwater. What we do have is a 1080p 60 frames per second video test, which you can see here. This is recorded with this camera, the GIISKOM Fancy R2. And I'm very happy with the quality here. Very happy with the battery life. I think it's phenomenal, and especially the accessory that lets you charge two batteries at the same time allows you to charge the batteries very quickly, which means before you know it, you'll be back to your full battery life, and it's very easy to take the batteries out of the camera, which is great. So very convenient. The only thing I don't like is that I don't know how to transfer files out of this camera with the USB cable. Didn't know how to do that, so that'll be in my review. But overall, good quality on the 1080p 60 frames per second, 1080p 60 frames per second, which is what I really like, and great battery life, so I'll definitely take this camera on vacation. It's also very lightweight, so hopefully it records well underwater with the underwater housing. Thanks for watching this video. 1080p video test, 60 frames per second. 1080p video test, 60 frames per second with the GIISKOM Fancy R2 action camera. 1080p video test, 60 frames per second. .1080p video test, 60 frames per second with the GIISKOM Fancy R2 action camera. 1080p video test to 60 frames per second. With the GIISKOM Fancy R2 action camera. .1080p video test, 60 frames per second. .1080p video test, 60 frames per second. With the GIISKOM Fancy R2 action. .1080p video test, 60 frames per second. .4K resolution video test with image stabilization with the GIISKOM Fancy R2 action camera. 4K video test with image stabilization. .4K video test with image stabilization on. .4K video test with image stabilization on.